Dinner and a Book is supported by the Rex and Alice A. Martin Foundation of Elkhart, celebrating the spirit of Alice Martin and her love of good food and good friends.
Isabel Gamble comes from a long line of women with secret knowledge. Her namesake is an ancestor known as Isabel Gowdy, Queen of Witches. But she's been taught since childhood to mask her knowledge, including her synesthesia. Let's meet today's guest, Jane Poe, to uncover many mysteries in Hester by Lori Lico Albanez. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad you suggested this book. There is so much in here historically and literally. And, well, would you set the scene for us? We are in this book either in the period of the Salem witch trials or 100 years later in this book's story. Set the scene there, what's going on in America. Not a simple question, right?
No, it's not. That's loaded. The witch trials were in the late 1700s, 1790s. The action of this novel takes place in the 1830s, which predates the great American Renaissance in American literature, which is pretty much led off by when Nathaniel Hawthorne publishes in 1850 The Scarlet Letter.
Ooh, that must ring a bell with you, right?
Well, it does. I taught this book for many years. I had a grandmother who, it's her copy that I first read. I had a great-grandmother who also taught English and loved this book. So I think I come by it naturally.
You do, and you understand it because you've been a professor of literature as well. So here we are. We're back and forth, and it's done in a way we know we're going back to the time of the Salem witch trials, and we're in the modern era
When we go to 1830.
1830s. And so let's talk about this word synesthesia. That's it. Perfect. This girl, this woman, has that talent. And there are some popular singers today that have this talent.
Beyonce has it.
Yes, and so does I forgot her name. She's been winning all kinds of prizes, winning trophies and all kinds of things. What does it mean?
It means when people say words, you see colors. And some composers had it. Some artists have had it. So when you say a name, she sees a color. And so this comes out in her embroidery, which is her trade. She came from Scotland and she was trained as a young girl to embroider. So whenever she sees color, whenever she sees names, she sees colors. Yes. So this is coded all the way through here.
It's like this became all these colors because whoever made it had that talent of seeing.
Or they followed a pattern.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is quite a story. It's a Scottish background, but now in the book we're in Salem. And some of the people that come to the United States find out they're not quite living up to the expectations of our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence.
Really, they came to the New World where they found the Old World being recreated.
Yes.
Isabel came to Salem on a boat called the New Harmony, which has some ironic meanings. But she finds the whole class structure. She's Scots-Irish, so she's at the bottom of the social ladder. If you're not one of the old families of Salem, you're a newcomer.
Yes.
She is also befriended and helped to survive by a free black woman who lives out on the outskirts of Salem, who keeps her alive with produce and garden things.
Yes. There's so many things happening here. And again, we're back to this theme of how women were treated, particularly if they were widows or they were never married.
Or they had a nasty disposition.
Yes, or they were too clever. Ooh, don't forget that. Too clever. You must be a witch.
Yep.
My goodness. Well, so we have all this going on, and we've decided to make a meal. I'm going to make a fish stew. Very simple. We're just putting in some liquids, chopped cod, some potatoes. I'm making some Brussels sprouts. We're going to have some ginger beer in our mugs. I would have loved to found some lager of the period. And Jane, what are you making?
I'm making peach cobbler for dessert because they really like their desserts. There's a cake shop that's mentioned in the book very often. And cobbler is an old-fashioned recipe where you just cobble together what you have. And so it's very simple ingredients, and you can make it with any fresh fruit of the time. So since it's almost August, I'm using peaches.
Wonderful. So here, you've got the scene. We've got the food. We've got the ideas. We know what happened in the Salem witch trials. I did not study this in high school, nor did we study Hawthorne, or we did memorize the poems of Wordsworth, though, about.
Well, you would have probably memorized Longfellow.
Oh yes,
he was American, and he was also a neighbor of Hawthorne outside of Concord, so they all knew each other, and he was very popular. His poetry is very moralistic and uplifting. Hawthorne was concerned with the dark side of man, which is probably why he so inspired Melville to write Moby Dick. We're talking about the dark side, but that doesn't sell. That's not popular.
Well, but I can't imagine Scarlet Letter was very popular, though, wasn't it?
It didn't sell that well.
Really?
Really. He never made much money from this. The bestseller came 2 years later when Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now that was a blockbuster bestseller.
Blockbuster. Well, getting back to our story here, we have this woman who comes with her husband, who turns out to be, the word then was scallywag. He's a scoundrel. He takes their wedding money, and when they arrive, he leaves and goes back to wherever he's going.
He goes back on board the ship which they came on. He's an apothecary. So the captain of the ship credits him with saving his life. So we didn't have regular doctors. We had apothecaries and people that are the native people that knew secret cures from the herbs and whatever was growing in the forest.
Well, I tell you, I have to start melting this butter, or I will be in trouble here.
Cobbler.
So you've got the setting, and this is a time when women, you dare not be a widow, you dare not be single, you dare not be pregnant and unmarried, because you could, by just a turn of the head, you could be accused of being a witch back at the time of the Salem witch trials. And so we have all of this going on, and who appears in this story of the 1800s with Isabel?
The day she lands in Salem, walking the pier, is a very mysterious, handsome young man with dark hair, and his name is Nat Hawthorne. But she doesn't know that, but she's intrigued with him because there's something about him. He's a little mysterious, he's very quiet.
Yes.
And when her husband goes back on the boat, absconding with her money, and she's left destitute, she's drawn to Nat. They meet several times in a museum where she sees exotic things brought back from all of the captains who've sailed the world, and this inspires her embroidery. She gets her designs from looking at these exotic things, and she and Hawthorne strike up a friendship, which later, of course, we know is going to become more than a friendship.
Yep, and of course she gets pregnant.
And of course her husband's not there. Of course he will show up at the most inopportune time, and the child will be ostracized because it is an illegitimate child.
Yes, and this Nathaniel Hawthorne, based on Nathaniel Hawthorne, he's charmed with her. He's sort of seduced by her intellectually and emotionally. So what we have is she thinks this is going to go somewhere, and he has other thoughts. And I think he's looking at the fact that he's old English, sort of.
He's old Salem, back generations. In fact, what he's covering up is his great-great-grandfather was one of the judges at the Salem witch trials.
Yes.
And he's changed the spelling of his last name to distinguish himself from this, but they're still old Salem. They're old society, but they've fallen on bad times because Nathaniel Hawthorne's father died at sea, and so the mother's left rather impoverished, raising 3 children, but trying to keep up appearances all the time.
Well, you see, we have all this going on, and of course the woman writing this book, she knows about the history of Nathaniel Hawthorne, but she's writing her own version of this, and it's very interesting. Now, her mother had told Isabel never to talk about your
Condition.
Yeah, or your synesthesia.
Right.
Yes, because people will.
That's not normal.
She must be a witch, and of course she had to keep this quiet. But she tells Nathaniel, and we don't know what he's going to do with that information. But he kind of abandons her, and she's sewing and she's embroidering and she's living on that as an income. But a lot of the women in town, they're very annoyed with her.
Got 2 burners.
I think you're doing well there.
Yes, they are. Well, she and Hawthorne have an affair, and we know from the Scarlet Letter that there will be an affair, there will be an illegitimate child. The husband of the adulteress will show up at a very inopportune time. We know that.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll leave that. This book can be enjoyed on several levels. You can just read it as an historical romance, and it works fine. Or you can go back and put it in the times.
Dig a little deeper, right? Dig a little deeper and find out what this was all about. Well, we're going to keep cooking here. We're going to take a little break. We're going to show you the menu, and then we'll be right back. See you soon. Okay, we're coming back here with our cooking. You're doing your peaches, your cobbler, you're cobbling your peaches. I'm cooking potatoes, and I'm going to add some milk, and I have some vegetable broth. I've already made the Brussels sprouts. I ran out my little kitchen garden, and we'll add a little lemon juice. And now I'm going to add the fish, the cod. And I had it frozen, and it's very easy to cut when it's frozen. So there, flipped right in there. And we'll cook this for about 10 minutes. And we will have a nice fish stew, which you could have in Salem, any day. So now, we have our story. We know that Nathaniel Hawthorne and Isabel well, I don't know. She's in love. We're not sure what state he's in.
I think he's enraptured.
He's enraptured. He's bedeviled. And, that's another thing. A woman wasn't supposed to bedevil a man because that was the sign of a witch. So, they couldn't win at all. It was just a horrible time. But in any case, I got to get this heated up a little. This is a simple way to make a fish stew, and you can add vegetables. You can add a can of vegetables. Mixed vegetables are fresh, and you've got a wonderful fish stew. Or some white wine. I'm going to put in some salt and pepper. And so we know that Edward finally comes home. That is the husband. What would you call him? We've got to give him a name. He's a real...
I would call him the cuckold husband.
Yes.
Comes home to find his wife is...
She's pregnant.
Pregnant.
Oh. And, of course, he's angry about that. And then he's drinking all the time. He comes home.
He's also drug addicted.
Oh, yes.
Which is handy if you're an apothecary.
Yes, exactly. And it's gone back for centuries. Even today, it can happen. So I think I'm going to add a little bit more of the broth. And so he comes back, and he's very angry, of course. And we're also following what some of the people are doing in the Underground Railroad to get people out of the South.
Remember that we had the fugitive slave law. So even if there was a runaway in the North,
yes,
the law said you must return them.
And
so the woman in the woods, Mercy, the freed slave, is involved with her brother in camouflaging runaways so that they can finally make it into Canada. And this is all going on in the outskirts of the little cottage where Isabel is staying.
In the meantime, Nathaniel's trying to sell books. He's trying to be published. He's glum. Nothing works. Nothing works.
He's just writing his short stories. And as Isabel tells him, you need to write about happier things. People want to read about love and triumph. And he's focused on the sins of the dark side of Puritanism.
Very dark side. You know, the old ministers that got up, sinners in the hand of an angry God.
Jonathan Edwards, yes.
Yep. And so you've got all this going on, and I think it would have been a horrible time to live in the United States. Actually, here's a little secret. The English people that lived in the area where the Pilgrims and the Puritans came from were so glad to get rid of them. Let's get them out of here.
Well, and the richest man in Salem, whose pregnant daughter, unmarried,
Yes.
her father, they made their money in the slave trade.
Yes.
And Isabel is called in to make a wedding dress for this girl who's been kept hiding in the house so nobody will know. And she designs a dress which covers the condition very cleverly. And of course, it's said in the very beginning, her mother teaches her that clothes are a way to cover everything, and you hide your flaws with clothes. And you
And
think
every sin, too.
yeah, you think about how that was. You kept your head covered, of course. You
Yes.
kept your hands covered
Arms
with gloves.
covered, your
So
legs.
Isabel is making her first claim to fame by embroidering gloves, which she's paid 60 cents a pair to embroider, and the local store in town sells them for $2 a pair, which she finds to be a little unfair. So we're
Very
also talking
unfair.
about capitalism and the exploited underclass, because of course Isabel, being a Scots-Irish, is not
Treated.
invited into society. And
Yes.
Nat Hawthorne is society.
And this is America. So, you know, this has always been going on, and this comes out in this book as well. I am going to cut the heat a little bit because I don't want my milk to curdle. You can also add what's that liquid milk you get in a can?
Evaporated?
Evaporated milk, but I don't really want to do that. Some people add whipping cream, and then they add some wonderful herbs. But this is a simple, you can use water, you can use vegetable
Isabel
broth.
would have used goat milk.
Goat milk, exactly. So now we are at the point where she doesn't see Nat. He doesn't come around anymore, does he? And she is absolutely befuddled by this. And of course, she's more and more pregnant. And how do we, at this point, cut to the idea that Nathaniel is using this experience as the basis of his book?
Well,
The
critics
Scarlet
have
Letter.
always wondered what he was hiding because his visage changed and aged dramatically. There's a belief in the times that whatever you're hiding inside comes out in either illness or in your face. I was taught once you'll have the face you deserve by the time you're 50, so you better not be hiding things. But Hawthorne's hiding his sin.
Yeah.
And he does it very well, but it gets away from him 20 years later when he writes the Scarlet Letter.
He writes, and of course, it's. You said it wasn't a big hit, but I think people were passing the book around and reading it, you know, under the covers.
They were disappointed because there's no sex in it. The sex happens between the chapters.
Oh, between the chapters. That's how you do it. Keep it safe. Anyway, so we have the influence of this event between Isabel and Nathaniel Hawthorne, which leads Nathaniel to write his book, The Scarlet Letter. And that used to, I remember seeing the movie and I just thought, oh, how horrible. The acting was marvelous. Yeah, go ahead.
The movie gives it a happy ending, as does the book. However, in The Scarlet Letter, as written by Hawthorne, the ending is Dimmesdale, the father of little Pearl, hides his sin and it kills him. Hester has to wear hers on the Scarlet Letter on her bodice, and she's out in the open, and she survives.
Oh my gosh. Well, and I think it was the modern version, the movie done by Arthur Miller.
The Crucible.
Oh yes, that too. Arthur Miller knew everything that was going on, though, didn't he? He really could take an old story and use it in another setting. But getting back to the book, I enjoyed it, but I was muddled for a while trying to get this straightened out between the Hawthorne and then the book that he was writing based on this book that we are reviewing today. It's called Hester, but the woman who is the focus is called
Isabel,
who came from a long line of witches. So we're going to take another break now. We're going to tidy up our food. We invite you to come to a Salem meal, right? Salem.
Mm-hmm.
Watch your P's and Q's. And so we'll be right back. And in the meantime, we're going to show you some pictures of Hawthorne, the young man, and Hawthorne, the older man.
And he was, when the second pictures were taken, he was in his 50s, which
50s.
I do not consider old.
No, it's not. It's not. So anyway, we'll be right back. Don't go away. Stay there. You're invited for dinner. Well, we've come to the end of Dinner and a Book, but we just have a few more comments we want to make, especially about, well, so many things. Let's talk about your book here. Tell us about this book.
Well, this was my first exposure to The Scarlet Letter. I found this in my grandmother's upstairs after I'd read a Hawthorne short story in high school. So I thought it was about adultery and I would learn something steamy. Well, it wasn't at all, so I didn't really understand it. But I treasure this first experience with The Scarlet Letter.
The Scarlet Letter. Ooh. And you have taught this period. And of course, this makes such a to-do about pregnant women that aren't married or are left by their would-be lovers.
Or are too openly sexual.
Yes. And you've taught it in modern day life here now. How do the students react to all the fuss about this book?
That was a job to overcome that. I would try to bring them in with Hawthorne's language, with the description, with what's behind all of this, and usually it worked, but they still thought Hester in The Scarlet Letter, Dimsdale, should just move to another town and tell everyone the A stands for awesome. That would be a typical response. They didn't understand why the child of this adulterous affair would be an outcast. And so I'm not sure if I would teach it today, because all of this would be very controversial.
Oh, it would be very controversial. And half the audience would say, what's the fuss?
What's the fuss?
And the other half would be judging you for bringing up this
Exactly.
story in this book. And the thing is, this woman who wrote the book today, she calls her character Hester, I don't know if she thought about that.
Isabel.
Isabel.
I think she does because of her description of all the embroidery. So I brought some embroidered gloves. These are leather from Italy. They're not linen from New England. But I was intrigued with how Hester took all of this inner turmoil and took it out in her embroidery, which is what women have done, well, and men. Women have done this to create art instead of
getting internally upset.
Right. And so I really loved her descriptions of that, also because I don't sew, so this intrigued me.
Well, and let's talk about our food too.
Oh, the food.
Yes. Tell us about your dessert. This looks delicious.
It's just fruit cobbler.
It's nice and brown. You've got the syrup and the peaches. Everything is cooked, ready to serve. You've cobbled it together beautifully.
You see, because the good wife would have cobbled it together in 30 minutes, and that's about what it takes even to cook.
Right, yes. And we have some seafood, stew, a fish stew. It's actually cod, and I have some potatoes and onions, butter, and there are some secret ingredients that people use. There's nothing secret here. There's secrets in the book,
Nothing's hidden.
but not in the stew, and some Brussels sprouts. So we're glad you joined us. Thank you for suggesting the book and for coming today.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about Hawthorne.
Yes, and thank you for watching. Remember, good food, good friends, good books make a very good life. Not a cobbled one, a very good one.
Thank you.
It can be
Yes.
good. Yeah, we'll see you next time.
This WNIT local production has been made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Dinner and a Book is supported by the Rex and Alice A. Martin Foundation of Elkhart, celebrating the spirit of Alice Martin and her love of good food and good friends.